Hello everyone, my name is Red NZ Blue and welcome to the expanded audience who have decided to join us on this deep study of arcane lore. And speaking of deep study, I've been thinking, and I've decided it's time for a bit of a change of format. See, the gimmick of this YouTube channel has been always that I stay as much in character as possible, an NPC of a Sage of Silvery Moon, a lecturer of the Conclave in Faerun. It's a fun gimmick, don't get me wrong. I get to pretend that you're all students, I script the video to talk about different editions of D&D just different points of history, and that's as it should be. If you've listened to previous videos, then you know that each D&D edition in the Forgotten Realms is preceded by a different calamity, but it's a living concurrent history, so that every wizard should know of the 4th Age of Magic, and does know of 3.5 edition, and can be totally aware that there have been at least 4 different iterations of the Fireball spell. So it's a gimmick that works. Up to a point. Because there's a previous video called Zone of Truth, Lord Ao, and I finished that video saying that perhaps Ao is the most powerful entity, and I couldn't think of anyone more powerful. And that was a lie. Meta, but a lie. Because we know from the Time of Trouble's books that Lord Ao reported his versions of events respectfully to a hidden entity, an entity that is implied to the reader to be the Dungeon Master. Now, I couldn't say anything in the video because there's no way an NPC could have possibly known that. I don't care what spell you think could exist. But to at least one viewer, that didn't matter. What mattered is that I didn't give the full account of Lord Ao, and that's what people are here for. They're here for answers, not to see an NPC give what he thinks is the full extent of answers. And so this will be the format from now on. For the first half to majority, Red NZ Blue, the Sage of Colours, will take the stand. He will continue to give lectures on the magics of Faerun and beyond. But in the second bit, the DM will take over, and will update with information only the people IRL could possibly know, and finish up with some ideas for how we can incorporate that knowledge into your game, whether you're a player or a dungeon master. And today's topic is... When we consider the quintessential divine spellcaster, I think most, if not all of us, would consider the priest. These individuals, usually, sometimes they're a collective, are able to channel the power of the gods and manifest them through free will as they see fit, guided by the doctrine of their domain. The current age of divine magic is withdrawn with the recreation of the Tablets of Fate by Ao. The rules of realm space have returned, and some greater degree of control appears to have been enforced over the gods. Now, the role of the priest is even more important, being the spokesperson for the deity, and the voice of the gods giving guidance to the masses. Now, some of you might be confused at this point because I've been saying the word priest and not cleric. And that's okay because most of you were born in the 5th Age, and so are used to the 2 divine archetypes, the open hand of the gods being the cleric, and the closed fists of the god being the paladins. But I'm talking in the more open sense of the divine spellcaster, the group of heroes who gain knowledge of spells and the power to cast them, from the gods or other entities that require faith. In the 2nd Age, a lot of the classifications that persist to this day were really nailed down, and the priest is a category of divine worshippers. Clerics, crusaders, druids, specialty priests, mystics, monks, and shamans are all types of priests. These classifications have spread out over time and blended into each other, but I enjoy bringing up the past, so we're going to stick with it for now. However, I'm going to respect the circles of druids who maintain now that druidry is not a type of priest, but rather a divine category pertaining to an old faith mechanism, just another fork in the road of magical evolutionism. So what exactly is it that elevates a priest to be able to use spells usually only known by the gods? Do we know how a priest is chosen? Not entirely. We all pray to the gods in some way, and we are all inspired by them. We can change the world with our actions and say that we are granted strength by the gods. But priests are conduits for a divine power that envelops the world and the connected planes. They don't change the world with their actions. Rather, it is by their actions that the gods change the world. The gods don't grant this power to everyone who seeks it, but only to those chosen to fulfill a higher calling. Harnessing divine magic doesn't rely on study or training. A priest might learn formulaic prayers and ancient rites, but the ability to cast priest spells relies on devotion and an intuitive sense of a deity's wishes. Likewise, not all members of the clergy in the realms have the abilities of the priest group, and all ceremonies and rituals of a church that channel direct magical manifestations of a deity's power must be carried out by members of a faith who are priests. Priests know, based on the talents and skills they have learned in life and the blessings that their deity has bestowed upon them, priests know what they are capable of doing. Whether that is known immediately or it takes a long time to come to a sort of epiphany, it doesn't matter. There is no importance in being the youngest or oldest when the connection is first made. All at the beginning appear to be equal in the eyes of the gods. And what is important is that each has a destiny. Their god has a plan, and they have the will and wisdom to enact it. And that's why we don't know exactly how a priest is chosen. That's a private matter between them and their god. Priests must always be devoted to their deities, of course, same as the rest of us, but perhaps even more so. This devotion was measured by how in tune their actions and words were to the domain of their god. Actions that were anathema to the god in question could result in a punishment. Perhaps the spell levels available to the priest were drastically reduced, or even cut off entirely. Everyone has heard the tales of quests to atone for transgressions, and in the Third Age there was the atonement spell, which was considered the only way to gain the gods' direct attention and subsequent forgiveness. Oh, you hoped it was forgiveness. So a priest, for sake of ease, is always chosen by their god. Some priests will maintain that they don't worship a god and that they instead strongly believe in the aspect of justice, for example. However, in the realms, Tyr is the god of justice, and that portfolio means that our non-god worshipping individual still receives power from him. It is very difficult, if not impossible, actually, to worship or believe in an aspect of life that is not connected to a god's portfolio. The only one I've seen so far is to worship outside the sphere of existence and go directly to worshipping Lord Ao, and his priests are not granted any spells. Which is the next point to make. If you're not chosen by a god to be a priest, you can't cast the spells. You could mimic the words exactly that the priest proclaims, but if you're not given a higher calling, then you're essentially wasting your time. There are ways around it, certainly, such as a wizard spell that functions the same as a priestly spell, or a bard who has spent time researching the effects of a spell from one of their stories. Those can be recreated by them through their own mysterious art, but for the most part, a priest spell list is their own. It's a strange dichotomy, that without the weave of Mystra, divine spellcasting would not be possible at all. However, the divine spellcaster does not use the weave to cast their spells. The spellcaster calls directly to the god, and the god always hears them. A tether between them and their chosen mortals exists without breaking. The gods then use the weave to send the divine creative energy to the mortal, because Mystra ensures prompt delivery and no wild fluctuations of power. The divine energy then manifests as a spell through the caster. Have you ever seen a trickery domain cleric cast spells through their double, but it was not the double that possessed the power to cast the spell? It's kind of like that. It's one of the reasons that the priesthoods had such trouble in the Fourth Age after the Spell Plague. They could hear the prayers of their faithful and the connection to their destiny had not been destroyed, but they were so used to using the weave that it took them a long time to go back to basics and send power through the connection itself. In the space of time between the First and Fifth Ages, the abilities of the priests, chiefly the clerics, have varied wildly. The general theme has remained much the same, however. They are a divine class of individuals who train extensively in the use of even the heaviest armors, wield potent weapons through which their training is geared towards defense, and wield powerful spells. It is in spells that they are the most proficient, able to call down terrifying displays of a god's wrath and direct their fury towards their foes, and one who stands in the way of their god's ineffable plan. All clerics are shaped by a core identity and belief, a specialization in their worship of their god. It's why they're sometimes called specialized priests. As part of a divine pantheon, each deity will embody a different aspect of life and civilization. This is their domain. For example, Lathander is a god of both birth and renewal, and is symbolized by the sunrise. He is the Morning Lord. His domain covers both life and light as a result. A cleric of Lathander may believe that the raising of new life and protecting the children of the world is the most important aspect of that world. Another may believe that the light of the sun is what ultimately brings new life into the world, and each new dawn is a new victory for the forces of good. A cleric's core identity empowers them, as they find a commonality with an aspect of their god's domain. Both clerics above will gain spellcasting abilities from Lathander, but the first will be empowered by the life domain, and the second by the light domain. Both worship the same god, but are drawn most to certain aspects of the philosophy. Both would be comrades in arms, would see each other as allies and friends, but the former would gain an increased efficacy over healing spells for themselves and allies, and the latter would be able to blind, burn, and brand enemies who would attack those friends. Priests overall, but clerics especially, also gain the ability to control or destroy undead. This is shared across all clerics, regardless of domain, and is split by good or evil. Generally, the good gods can manifest their divinity through a cleric and destroy or turn undead. The evil gods can control or awe undead. The distinction by alignment is down to the type of energy that gods control. Powerful beings of good or evil have a sympathetic link to positive or negative energies, and these energies respectively disrupt or control the force that animates the undead. It's a powerful reminder that these enlightened individuals can wield just the manifested divinity of a deity without intent, without focus, and can seriously alter our reality. So if a priest is chosen because they're destined to enact change, why can't they get chosen and immediately cast the reality-altering miracle or true resurrection? Why is it that if they're in an adventuring group with a wizard, they're generally only going to increase in power at the same progression? Why don't they come out of that gate running? I can think of a couple of reasons pretty quickly. First of all, we've all heard of the phrase, absolute power corrupts absolute. Now give absolute power the ability to call down columns of fire. I don't think many of us, if any of us, have the wherewithal to not let their power go to their heads. Wanting to walk to the next town but it's raining? Control weather. Wizard about to cast magic missile at you? Anti-magic zone. 3 goblins running towards you armed with wooden swords? Earthquake. I think that gods make priests gain power incrementally in order to give priests the subtlety and knowledge they need, so they're not throwing life-changing and trouser-changing levels of power wherever they feel. But I think another better answer comes down to unity. Remember, we worship a great many gods, and for the most part of our societies we are united in a common goal. While you might be the chosen of Tymora, able to cast mighty spells by your direction and her permission, I'm also a follower of Tymora. My actions help her, not as much as yours, but I'm still important. The people that you adventure with are often people of destiny, made manifest also, and I think that the gods are wise beyond us all, who ensure that when I finally figure out how to cast a 2nd level spell, so do you. You are encouraged to grow with your adventuring party. If you start out being able to cast 9th level spells, the story becomes about you, because you'll have the power to defeat every threat immediately. But when you're facing Asmodeus or Orcus or the Tarrasque, as your destiny is laid bare, you'll really, really want that story to be about you and your friends. And that's all the time we have for the Priests of Faerun. Coming up next, now that we've talked about the Spellcaster Divine class, it's time we talked about the Supernatural Divine class, the Paladin. Until then, to be continued.